1 year on then, Joumanna, since October the 7th, and the horror that we saw being unleashed in Israel, is the conflict that has now spread any closer to ending?
Well, a sober and traumatic day for Israel. If you rewind back to almost this time, 365 days ago, one of the singlest deadliest days in Israel's history. 1,200 people were killed, and of course 250 were then held as hostages, of which about 100 of them are still in captivity. And that was 1 year ago. And it marked a significant turning point for the region and for the events that have unfolded since then, with Israel going on the offensive and launching its largest military campaign against those Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. And you fast forward to today, the Palestinian Health Ministry put the total number of deaths at more than 40,000. You have more than 90% of the population within the Gaza enclave displaced, and no sign of a ceasefire, even though, as I mentioned, around 100 of those hostages are still held in captivity. But it is not just a front in Gaza that is being waged. It is now being transformed into a multi-front conflict. We've been talking about the second time there has been a direct attack from Iran into Israel this year. The first one took place in April. Israel responded. But of course, just a week ago, Iran also fired almost 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel. And it is expected to respond in some shape or format in the next couple of days. And how that response is going to look like, again, will shape what the regional situation is going to look like from here. And I haven't even mentioned the third front that has opened up, which is perhaps the most active front, and that is the conflict that is intensifying in Lebanon now, with Israel now starting a ground incursion into the southern part of the country, the border that started 1 week ago, with ongoing airstrikes continuing not just around Beirut, but around other parts of the country, with the stated aim of destroying Hezbollah military infrastructure. And so from Israel's perspective here, it's very clear that the reason that this conflict has taken on a multi-dimensional format is because they're going after their opponents, and specifically Iran's axis of resistance, represented by Iran themselves, by Hezbollah in Lebanon, by Hamas militants, and the Houthi rebels around Yemen too.
OK, and Joumanna, you point, of course, to what has been described as that inevitable response from Israel to that Iranian attack. And you touch, of course, on the developments as well on the ground in Lebanon. Do we have any clarity on what the objectives are for Israel in Lebanon at this point?
Well, Israel's stated objectives and the war objective that they introduced a couple of weeks back was to restore security to the north so that the 60,000 odd residents who live in northern Israel can return back safely to their homes without being exposed to the risk of rockets being fired at them by Hezbollah. And so on the back of that, the conflict within Lebanon has been intensifying. Airstrikes around Beirut, central Beirut, and even in the eastern Bekaa Valley, close to the Syrian border, have massively intensified over the weekend. Almost 30 airstrikes alone on Saturday being reported, stronger even than the airstrike that took out Hassan Nasrallah the prior week. The ground incursion continues, though not a lot of detail there on what exactly is happening on the border. There are reports that around a dozen Israeli soldiers have been killed, though IDF do state that they have managed to dismantle around 2,000 Hezbollah targets. Now, while this is all going on, the humanitarian situation in Lebanon is deteriorating rapidly. The Lebanese Prime Minister has talked about 1.2 million people being displaced. The death toll has risen to more than 2,000. Schools are on hold. About 60% of children who would be going back to school are also displaced. Right now, aid has started coming in, the UN supplying their first shipment of humanitarian aid coming through this weekend, and still political stalemate in the country with no sign of a ceasefire.